Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today and enjoyed these stories. If you want early access to my videos, then make sure you check out my Patreon, or make sure you check it out if you want to support my channel generally, and make sure you check out my podcasts in the description below. I have a quick message before the stories start, and that's that I've had COVID recently and it given me a few ideas. So sorry if my voice is a little bit different in any of these recordings. It's not 100% recovered. It's probably about 90% there, but I can tell it's not 100%, but that's fine. So obviously during COVID, you can't really do anything. And I'm someone who always exercises and always has goals and things that I'm working towards. So I did actually find it quite difficult not really doing anything or being able to go out or, yeah, just do anything generally. But what I did was I just accepted that the time was going to be a little bit boring for me and I was going to be able to not do things that I wanted to. And I just reflected on how I was doing with everything before and I looked for areas of improvement. I think it's important to take time to evaluate the things that you're doing in life and just look for what you could be doing differently. Also, I didn't get too caught up in the fact that I knew I wasn't going to feel too good because I always use exercise which makes me feel good, and obviously I couldn't do that either, so I just kind of accepted it. What I did do is set some new goals and change some of the things that I was doing going forwards. I found that way I could actually focus on more of the things that I wanted to, and I didn't feel so bad during my COVID time because I had them things to look forward to, and even trying out some new sports and stuff that I haven't before. I think that's the best way you can get through the time if ever you're unwell and you can't do anything. Because if you sit down for too long and if you're just not doing anything, it's going to be natural not to feel too good. But as long as you aren't constantly overthinking things and you're thinking forwards, I think it makes a big difference. Because I'm someone that can overthink quite a lot. So that's why it helped at least focusing my attention on a positive and forward area with the future. So if anyone is struggling with their mental health and uses exercise and things and suddenly gets unwell or gets injured and can't do as much, make sure that you spend some time evaluating what you were doing and looking for areas of improvement, and then make sure that you start planning on what you're going to do when you get better and seeing if there's anything new that you could try that might be interesting. And also try and get into the exercise slowly after you've recovered and understand that it's going to take a while for your body to get back to normal. And if you try and go 100%, you'll probably feel worse off, so just take it easy. And then you also don't have too much pressure on going back into doing things at 100%. I used to be somebody who did that all the time, where as soon as I got better, I'd try and give 100%, but that just led to me getting burnt out more, so just be careful when you come back to things. So yeah, hopefully that can help some people out there, and I hope you enjoyed these stories, and I'll speak to you all soon. I'm a search and rescue worker. Now, I'm also somebody who loves to be in the great outdoors, and something that I volunteered for was doing some nature tours. We get a lot of tourists where I live, so I didn't have an issue doing this. Where I live, it's very popular even during the winter months, so it meant often that tourists would need some guidance, and just you had to make sure they didn't get lost, basically. Now, one area that we went to, you had to take the cable cart things up to the top of a hill, and that was no issue. I was friends with the people that worked there and we had a really good relationship, and on this one particular day, we were getting things ready. You had a beautiful view of the city near where I lived from on top of this hill thing, and the tourists would always love to go here. You had to be careful because they're pretty stupid sometimes and they'd actually go almost off the edge. Another colleague joining me this particular day was a ranger, and he told me that he noticed something odd. He saw some footprints which went further off of the normal trail, but they didn't look right. They kind of looked too big. I mean, I know a lot of people wear snowshoes up here, but it almost looked like it was covered in some kind of material. I can only describe it as something fluffy, but not. Almost like it was more porous. Also, the strides were massive, and it didn't look right. Apparently there'd been some reports of some kind of weird person further out from the rest of the group earlier, wearing a white, kind of grey colour coat. They only ever saw the silhouette, but they said that this person looked pretty big. So me and my buddy go to investigate, and we don't have to make it too far. We realise that these tracks are going deep into the woods where we never usually go. And after about 5 minutes of following them, we notice that there's a really bad smell around here, almost like somebody or something had died. I start to panic a little bit, but I feel reassured by the fact that my friend is literally right next to me, and he's had more experience being a ranger than I have a search and rescue worker. Now that was when I saw it. I locked eyes with I don't know what. Now these eyes were probably about 7 or 8 inches apart, and they're a good 8 feet or so above the ground. I can only describe what appeared to be a Halloween mask, but something with orange glowing eyes was staring at me. And I didn't have to tell my friend about what I was seeing, as he saw it too. I locked eyes with whatever this is for probably about 10 seconds before I heard the most deep growl that I've ever heard in my life. The next thing I knew, my ranger buddy grabbed my hand and we're hiking back in the opposite direction that we come from, constantly looking over our shoulders. We eventually made it back to the station and decided to close off the area for the day. In fact, we closed it off for that whole weekend. We radioed in what we'd seen to some other towers, and they said they're going to keep an eye out for whatever this was. The local law enforcement didn't want to know when we tried to explain this to them, thinking that it was just us playing a prank on them, but I still don't know what I saw to this day. I can only describe it as kind of like a Yeti thing, but I don't believe in those, but I don't know what it could have been. So this is a story my dad recently told me about my grandpa, his dad, and my great-grandpa. My grandpa grew up in a very rural southern Indiana, but moved to a very rural southern Illinois in his youth. So this takes place in Illinois. One night, Grandpa and his dad were hanging outside at his uncle's, who lived a couple of miles away. Keep in mind, this is in the 40s out in the country, so all of the roads are basically dirt. Anyway, it was pretty late, so they decided to head home. Hopping into their old car, going probably about 15 miles per hour through those old wooden roads. At some point, as they're driving and talking, they pass something along the edge of the road straight up ahead, and this thing stands upright. They both hunted and are very familiar with any animals or locals that may be around. Neither of them really said anything for a minute. They both looked at each other and said, "What was that?" My grandpa asked his dad, "Do you want to turn around?" And he said no, and they keep driving. My grandpa said it resembled a big owl or a small person just standing in the ditch. This happened in 2021 with me and 3 of my friends when we decided to go out to a late night walk through the forest in Mission, BC to a small lake at night. We were at the bushes before the train tracks, and we were standing there contemplating whether it is actually a good idea to move forward, going further into the forest past the train tracks. For some reason, we stood there and 2 of my friends felt uncomfortable that they're actually going anywhere. And I, on the other hand, with my other friend, are feeling rather adventurous, but eventually we all decide to walk. So we stood there, and we were like, "Why don't you guys want to go in?" You could just tell that they felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave. So we waited a bit longer, then both me and my other friend felt uncomfortable and decided it's not a good idea to go. Then we hear things in the bushes a couple of feet away, like something stepped on a branch, but there was no other sounds whatsoever. It wasn't a small branch either, like a thick one, and it wasn't like a snap, it was like a really loud crash sound, like something really big was there. No sounds of bushes moving or anything like that. Now, we all decided it was no good. Felt like we're being observed by something or someone that's possibly dangerous, and we took off back to the truck immediately and left. It was probably just an animal, but it was quite weird. Also, the potential of being stalked out there is pretty scary, especially because there's a group of us and whatever this is wasn't scared. That's the weird part for me. So here's a little less backwards but more country roads of a paranormal story. Every summer, my family and some close friends would all travel up from Southern California to eastern Sierra Nevada mountains along the CA/MV border to the town of Bridgeport. If you've ever been, it's a super cool area, big biker route to Reno Tahoe, excellent outdoor camping and hiking in Yosemite High Country Ridge, in wildlife. There's crazy old history, and native tribes, and the gold rush of the West all happened there. It has a ghost town nearby it, and one of my favourite things in the world to do, trout fishing. Mark Twain even once stayed in the town back in the day, which I think is cool. The town is small and has your typical 20 buildings, Main Street USA to match the feel, all surrounded by rivers, lush meadows with cattle and horse ranches, and absolutely gorgeous wooded snow-capped mountains. We would often camp near Twin Lakes, just outside of the town about 10 miles away, but always made a point to get to town for dinner at this bar, Rhinos, for pizza and beer, at least once during the trip. So, one night we did this, and afterwards, we made our way back to the camp at twilight, just light enough to make out the peaks on the horizon, but it's still densely dark with billions of stars out in force now. Now this back road to the camping area would actually zigzag through the square-cut properties of ranchland. It's a narrow two-lane, edged by barbed wire and an irrigation channel, and minimal streetlights if any at all. Literally, can only think of one installed by the dude's ranch out here. So we drive back very carefully to camp, having to use our brights due to how dark it is, making sure that we keep an eye out for deers and things. And when we finally pull into camp, my mum immediately says, "Did you see that kid in the swimsuit on the side of the road?" On the side of the road? I say no. Where? On the side of the road, near the cows, who's shirtless walking around, my mum replies. Now I'd been driving behind her and my dad, and there is no way that I could have missed that. Now nobody in our car saw him, and his dad said that he didn't either. When she initially saw him, however, also not shocked, my mum says that she'd seen paranormal before. It always seemed to follow her, and she was dead serious, even describing the colour of the shorts, his hairstyle, and said he was walking the same direction that we were travelling, so she couldn't see his face, but had to be in his 20s. So we half-jokingly jumped to the conclusion that maybe it was a ghost. After all, it was dark and late, nobody else had seen him. Even in the summer Sierra, with high elevation, you could easily kill somebody who wasn't prepared to be out here in the cold at night, especially shirtless in swim trunks. On a clear night in August, I have woken up in the teens from temperature. And where she was describing is literally in the middle of nowhere. It takes us about 20 minutes just to drive it at a good speed, let alone walk. Especially not in the dark, but I guess anything's possible. The next morning, we get up to learn my idiot friend, the same one who got a big scratch in the previous post, left the cooler out for the rest of us and went to bed, and a bear actually got a buffet out of us. So we decided we'll make the most of it and go to town for supplies, some further fishing spots, and dinner again. This time on the way back to camp, I'm driving in front of my parents, zigzagging through the fields, when all of a sudden, there is a bright set of headlights on me. Looking back, I could tell that this had to be some kind of lifted truck, maybe a Bronco or similar, rearing up my SUV. So close at times I thought we were going to get rammed. I start speeding up a little at first, but the car stays on me. I get annoyed now and concerned. After all, this was a 2-lane road that anybody wanting to pass could easily and safely do so. There was no need for this whatsoever. On top of that, this isn't really somewhere that you'd want to pull over and stop at. And there was also loads of deers around too, but the car kept pressing. My wife, then girlfriend, and friends start to get a little freaked out, thinking about the backwards kind of things that happen here. Now surprisingly, this actually continues through the fields until I get to the final turn before it goes from meadows to woods, and I get a real heavy gut feeling, almost like a scream in my head telling me to slow down, so do or die. I start pressing the brakes hard, fully expecting the truck to ram us. As I do, we're coming around the corner, and sure enough, there's a 6-pack of deer in the middle of the road. I was immediately shaken up. It's always startling when you see animals out of nowhere in the dark, especially big ones. It then dawns on me though, I'm not being blinded anymore, and we definitely didn't get hit. I look back in the mirror and the lights are gone, just gone. No dust in the rear brake lights from the vehicle pulling off the road. Nothing screaming by us in the other lane, and then eventually I see my folks driving up behind us. We're all dumbfounded trying to figure out where this person went. The deer clear the road and we make the rest of the drive to camp, and admittedly, the adrenaline got me irritated, so I started ranting off about how stupid this guy is, how we could have died. When we get out of the cars and my mum immediately starts giving me the typical parent talk, but I get even more annoyed when she calls me stupid for taking off like that, and how lucky I am not to have killed us all because of the deers. Well, if that guy wasn't riding behind me so close, it wouldn't be an issue. What are you talking about? No one was behind you. Oh, how the tables had turned. Luckily, my wife and friends had experienced everything with me and start chiming in about the truck. I then start talking about how I finally had enough to listen to my gut, and the reason that I decided not to slow down initially and why I had to when I knew the deers were there. It gave my mum chills. She apologised but told me to be careful next time, but then started laughing and saying how weird the whole trip had been. I'll give this to my mum. She never did call us crazy for what we experienced in life, which is something that I think a lot of parents neglect for their children. It's funny because I've always had similar experiences, but I never expected to have one myself. This road also hasn't given us any issues before or since, but I'll admit, I drive it a lot more cautiously now. I always wonder if the shirtless guy and the truck was somehow connected, but never found out anything. The Lord only knows, I guess. I'm a ranger, and I'm someone who's fairly obsessed with fitness. This meant that I often went on different runs. I think I got into it because my mum used to do it and I liked the way that it made me feel. When I was younger, I would never really go jogging far. I would only go up the road and back. I eventually made it a bit further and went past my own street, across a bridge. Eventually I decided to go a bit further and actually went up to a fire station that wasn't too far away from where I lived. And eventually, I could do a big loop. The only problem that I found with the road is that it was very close to other cars, so it basically meant that what would happen is you'd always have to be really careful. I remembered once that I had a bad fall. It was really slippery and I hurt my hip, and I decided that I couldn't actually go work for a few days because of it. Now the real danger of this is that I could have really easily slipped into the road. I actually moved town not long after, and I continued to do my jogging. The area that I moved into had lots of different hills, so I also found this to be very exhausting. I didn't realise that it would make such a big difference going on an incline, but my god does it make the biggest of differences to how you feel when you jog. Now, through my line of work, this became an especially handy tool. I found that I had better natural fitness than all of the other rangers there, and it also meant that I could take calls which were much deeper than everybody else without having an issue. I mean, especially the ones where that you'd actually have to take a lot of gear with you because of how far it was. There's one story that I'd like to share with you first, and that's what happened to me one day when going for a jog. Now, this actually didn't happen to me while I was on duty, but in another time. And I remembered this one because I sprained my ankle. I hadn't really sprained my ankle before, so it was especially painful to me. I remember I stopped for a while, and I noticed that it was almost dark as I made my way back out of there. I remembered that I saw something strange and glowing though that I couldn't quite explain up ahead. It almost looked like somebody had a street light with a filter on it, and I go to see what this is. To my absolute amazement, there's a bluey green glow like I've never seen before covering all of the plants, and I feel kind of drawn into this. That's when I encounter what I can only describe as some kind of being. It was all black, but I could see the silhouette and eyes. It wasn't that tall, it was about 5 feet in total, and it raises its hand up and touches me. I don't know what this is, but I remembered feeling extremely lightheaded and nauseous. I then woke up, what felt like only 10 minutes but turned out to be hours according to my watch, and everything was completely normal and as it should be. Weirdly, I then realised that my foot is healed and I'm in no pain whatsoever, and I quickly find my bearings and make my way out of there. I'm constantly looking around, and for some reason I don't have any fear in this situation. What was weird is I can see where I fell down earlier, but it's almost like I've healed too quickly and you can see scabs and scars on my knee where I fell. I eventually got back to safety, and I tried to find that spot again since, but I've never been able to find it successfully. Now, years ago, I moved from a very small town to a remote valley out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by national forests and not many neighbours. It was just what I'd always wanted. At that point in my life, I'd been a paramedic for about 4 or 5 years. Being an outdoorsy, civic-minded sort, I decided to volunteer for the services with a local search and rescue organisation. But being such a tiny, poorly funded organisation, we were kept surprisingly busy. In the 9 years I was with them, we'd have at least one rescue, sometimes several, every weekend, spring through fall. The majority of these calls were roughly 100 miles of poorly maintained fire trails, which are very popular with dirt bikes and quad riders. When they'd inevitably get lost or get into a wreck or injured, we'd head out and track them down and give them some medical care, and then fly out on a helicopter and try and help them get out of there. Now, about 2 weeks after joining, and with zero training beyond what I'd learned as a Boy Scout and medic, I get my first call. A group of dirt bikes from the city had lost a member of their party. For some reason, they had put their least experienced rider at the back of the group of a dozen or so, and took off into the woods. When they returned to the trailhead 4 hours later, the inexperienced guy went missing. They set out again and looked for him for 4 or 5 hours and then gave up and called 911. The timing from the initial 911 call until we had a squad assembled at the trailhead was actually impressive. It was no more than 20 minutes, but we were already 8 or 9 hours behind the ball. We did a very quick briefing, distributed maps and divided into teams and then set off. They put me on a quad with the most experienced guy and we headed out. The plan was for each 2 to 3 person team to take on one of the longer trails that ringed around, and then, after searching, we'd systematically work out into the shorter maze-like trails up in the interior. This was to be a hasty search, none of the grid search stuff, just looking for clues. I don't know what I expected. Expecting maybe a few dirt roads through the woods or something, but these trails are honestly a nightmare. They're extremely rugged, technical trails, where you really had to know what you were doing and where you were going, or you'd never make it out. The GPS also rarely worked due to the rugged terrain and tree coverage, and radios and cell phones weren't much use either. The maps didn't account for all the random trails that riders would make. The only marked roads were fire breaks, and mileage-wise, those accounted for maybe 10% of trails. Why this guy hadn't been partnered with somebody or put to the front is beyond me. For hours, I'm caked with mud, bleeding from being hit by branches and exhausted and just done. We take a water break and hear broken radio traffic that sounds like a bike has been found but no rider. It's only a couple of miles from us, so we head in that direction. When we get there, the bike is off to the side of the road, along with the quads of other teams, but we can see them a few hundred feet in the woods. We walk over and find them looking down for the missing person, who is unfortunately passed away. On first glance, his eyes appear open, but it turns out they're not. It didn't make sense though. His bike still had gas in it, he had water and food. He's a healthy guy in his late 20s. What happened? It looked almost like he put his bike down and passed away. We wrapped him in blankets, then put him on Stokes and took him to the trailhead where a coroner was waiting. About a week later I ran into the coroner and asked for the cause of death. The pathologist's determination was cardiac dysrhythmia, secondary or extreme anxiety. I mean, the guy literally died of fright. Up until that point I didn't think this was a thing. I'm always wondering what was going through his head. Was he afraid of the woods or being lost? If so, then why did he not just go on the path? Why did he have to go blindly into the woods? I'd probably spent too long out in the woods because I become incredibly comfortable out there. Every so often, I'd hear or see something that I couldn't explain, but it never really unsettled me. Now, I really had a knack for being out in the winter. I don't know why, I just really liked it. There was something about being out and the added silence that really was something I found peaceful. What made it all the better was the fact that I had a beautiful house that my family owned that was surrounded by miles and miles of forests. Now this house was quite some ways up a hill, and it was somewhere that I loved going to. It wasn't necessarily modern, and you actually had to use a stove fire, I think that's what you call it, to stay warm. We'd even use candles sometimes to stay warm up there. Now, I remembered when I was a bit younger something weird that happened. Now, I'm gonna have to tell you this from my dad's perspective because I don't really remember it clear enough, but this is what my dad said happened. So we're staying up there during one winter, just because the place is so beautiful, and to try and have a nice family holiday. I was working really hard at the time and I needed the break and clearness, so we headed up there. The first couple of days were absolutely beautiful, and it gets to Christmas Eve. We have all of the presents set up and a really nice Christmas tree, and this is a real one, not like the modern ones. We even have the fire going and it's really peaceful. My two kids at the time were really excited to see Santa Claus. There's my son and my daughter. Now, my daughter was a little bit younger but still believed in Santa, even does partly to this day. Well, that's a lot more than my son, which is why my story gets a bit weird. So, we put the kids in bed and it's just me and my wife laying there happy. Now, suddenly, my son runs in the room saying, Daddy, I saw Santa Claus out the window. Now, obviously realising something's completely wrong, I get up. I realise that my son's not just going to make this up, and I kind of panic a little. I run out to the window and I don't see anything. He says, look, Santa's gone off running. I open the window and put my head out and ask my son to show me where. I quickly close it and grab my son and run out the front. And, what do you know? There's a silhouette of somebody running off in the distance into the tree line. I scream out, hey, but they don't respond. They seem absolutely panicked and maybe injured. They were running a little weird. From what I can make out, they're very old and have quite a long beard, and there's not much else I can see. But this definitely wasn't Santa Claus. I chased off after them as quick as I could, but they must have really took off because I never saw them again. I wasn't stupid enough to get lost in the woods trying to track this person down, but I realised something's really off. I eventually go back to my worried wife and son and I tell them not to worry about anything. I then say, oh, Santa's come too early, almost like a joke trying to get my son to calm down, but it actually works. The daughter was also a bit upset but much happier after realising this. In their minds, I just chased off Santa and I was a monster, but in my own, I knew what happened. I asked my son to describe what happened and he said he was laying there half asleep in bed when he opened his eyes and saw Santa Claus staring at him through the window. I said how long was he there, and he said he doesn't know, but it must have been a while because he felt like somebody was there for quite some time. Apparently, he thought that maybe Santa was near and decided to pretend he was asleep for a good 10 minutes, just in case Santa was actually there about to deliver presents. Yeah, you can imagine how that made me feel, and I called the authorities, but unfortunately they didn't find anybody. So yeah, that was my dad's story, and now I find it as creepy as heck. From my perspective, it is literally just me waiting to see Santa. But looking back on it now, it really makes me feel sick. I hate the fact that things like this happen. I still have no idea who that person is, and honestly, sometimes when I'm out there on my own, I hope I find them just so I can give them a good beating. But I'll never know who it was, but it still freaks me out. Nothing too similar to that's actually happened since, and I'm quite grateful for that. Other than that, I had a really good childhood. Now, there's one other pretty creepy thing that I know that happened from when I was a bit younger, also related to this. Now, I had a friend who I'll just call Jack for the sake of this, who was my best friend at the time. Near Jack's house and not too far from the house that we had, there was a really nice wooded area. This was kind of secluded away from everything and I don't know, it just had a certain vibe to it and we had lots of fun there. One of our favourite things that we could do was climb up a really big old tree. I remembered we'd do it sometimes if we heard other people, just because we didn't want them to intrude on us and make us jump, or I don't know, we were just kids so we're a little bit worried. Now, earlier in the day, we'd been doing some stupid things. We'd been stealing some firewood off somebody's front drive. Now, when we'd run up on the driveway, one of us would keep lookout and the other would go and grab the logs. I don't know why we did it, we literally had no use for these things, but I guess it's just a thing to do at the time. Now, we didn't actually like the people who lived here, mind you, because every time we played games outside, they would get really angry. I remembered one time we were playing catch or something and the ball went into this person's yard, and this old man comes out, grabs it and literally doesn't give it back again. I mean, we're literally kids having fun and he can't stand it. Like he had nothing better to do other than this. Well, hey, now was time for our payback. Now, after getting as much wood as we could pretty much handle without making it too obvious that we'd taken them, we head back to the tree. Now, we played a few games until we heard a voice screaming. They were calling out, hey, I know you're up there. Hey. So, what did we do? We panicked. I ran behind the big tree and immediately began climbing, but my friend Jack, he wasn't really a good climber and he needed all the help he could get. He started climbing up the tree and actually got a cut on his leg and started to panic, and I had to go down to rescue him. Eventually he was okay and decided to keep going higher. I told him not to and that it's a bad idea, but he didn't listen. I was in quite a good point, just out of sight where I could peer around the tree and see what was happening up ahead. Now, there wasn't too much happening up ahead at first, so I actually grew relatively relaxed at this. Now, not too much longer later, we can hear the voice but much louder. They say, hey, I know you're here, what are you doing? But this voice sounded different. It sounded far too deep. I also saw a couple of flashlights. It was now getting a bit dark, and I thought, God, I'm really in trouble now, and I really hope that my parents don't find out. Yeah, it wouldn't have been the best if my dad had found out, because he actually warned me about playing out here, so I wasn't looking forward to potential consequences, and at the same time, I was willing to do everything I could to try and minimize the risk of getting that whooping off my dad. So I'm playing it safe. Now, they ended up coming literally to the base of the tree. One of them whacks on the base of it, saying, "Come on, we know you're out here." And my heart falls through my chest. All they have to do is look up just a little bit and they're gonna see me, and I can now see that it's a group of angry adults, until eventually they make their way. Now, we stayed up this tree for God knows how long, and I didn't make any communication with my friend. I knew it was a bad idea because it's gonna be obvious that we're talking, and I didn't know if these people were waiting for us. I was 100% certain it was the people annoyed about us taking their wood. Also, when they left, I could see them carrying things which I'm pretty certain was a firewood, but I thought, well, at least I avoided my dad. But the problem is now that it's growing very late, and I'm gonna get in much more trouble if I'm not home in time. I knew the best bet now was to say that I was gonna stay at my friend Jack's house. Now, this is something I've done a few times before and that I actually really enjoyed during sleepovers, but today I didn't really want to have to do that if I didn't have to, but it was looking that way. Now eventually I say, "Jack, Jack," and I don't hear a reply, so I realise that something's off now. I say, "Jack, come on, where are you?" And I look up the tree and I realise that he's gone. Thinking, how could this guy have possibly gone further? I start climbing higher and higher until I realise that he's not there. I think, God, did he get captured? In my mind, this is the last I'm ever going to see of my friend, and I actually feel a little bit scared, and this is the first true panic set in. I eventually make my way down, and I actually hurt myself getting off the tree. I didn't judge the fall very well, and my God, I don't know how I didn't break my legs. I was quite frustrated at myself for losing my friend, and I knew I had to look for him. Now, I sat down, and it's very dark. I take one step and I hear a loud sound, which immediately I realise is a frog, and I calm down a bit. I realise just how jumpy I am now, and how unsettling everything's making me. It was getting a little bit cold too, and I wasn't really dressed too well for the weather. Now I start making my way in a new direction that I haven't been before. This is through the very high grass. Now, I make it quite a long way along here, saying, "Jack, Jack, where are you? Jack, I need you now. We have to go." Now, the last thing that I wanted to do was go out of here without my friend, but I really don't feel like I have much of an option now. I think, God, why couldn't we have just done something normal? And kind of cussed myself out for a bit. I continue walking, wading further and further through this tall grassy stuff until eventually I hear someone whistle. I drop down really quickly and turn back to see what it is. Now, initially I see somebody waving, but because of the fear, I can't really see clear and it takes a second for my eyes to adjust. Then I realise it's Jack, in the tree. He says, "Hey, it's clear." I say, "Jack, for God's sake, how did you get up there? I was just there." And he said, "Hey, look, I come down, just come back quick. Don't move another inch forward." And I don't. I then start coming back the way that I went, and I realise that it's quite soggy ground around here. Now, I didn't realise how much ground I'd covered because it takes me quite a long time to end up catching up with my friend again. He says, "Hey, come here." No, seriously. And I kind of think that I'm in danger again, so I start up the tree. I eventually make it to where my friend is, and I say, "Where did you go?" And he says that he couldn't hear from me, and he was worried that they had done something and couldn't spot me where I was, so he climbed down as quietly as he could and searched the area, then come back again. I tell him my perspective, and he says, "I don't know how we didn't see each other," and I agree. He then says, "Look, I need you to come up here." I'm a little hesitant because I don't want to climb up the tree anymore because it looks dangerous, but he offers to go down, giving me enough space to get up there appropriately and safely. I do that, and eventually make it to almost at the top. As I do so, a large part of the tree falls down and makes a really loud sound, and I'm clung there. I don't want to move any further up now because it's not stable, so instead, I just look around. Now, I then see what my friend was pointing to from further down. Just up to the edge of where the grass is, there's a huge drop. Now, this is almost a cliff like I've never seen before. It's just pure blackness down the edge. I let out a large gasp and say, how did we not see that before? And Jack then tells me that I was literally only probably 2 steps away from going off the edge into the water below. Now, I know for a fact that I would have died or would have really seriously hurt myself and probably fell unconscious had I have kept on going any further. What really creeps me out about that situation is just a feeling of realization that I was 1 step away from being really hurt, but honestly having no idea about the danger that I was in. I was really mad at myself, like honestly. But eventually we both make it down again safely, and we decided to go and check how much of the wood they've actually taken back. Jack and I then half joke about actually taking it back again, but we decided to leave it for another time. Now weirdly, we get to the exact spot where the wood should be and it does look different. We have a look around until eventually we find the pile. Now weirdly it was exactly where we'd left it before, but also there was an old busted out computer now next to it. You could see that somebody really had a go at it with a hammer, which we thought was pretty bizarre. We then realised that this is probably what the group of guys were after that we saw earlier. And we suddenly realised that it wasn't the old person that we didn't like or his friends trying to get the wood back. And that gave us chills. Now we're so unsettled by the realisation of this that we actually decided to put the wood back where it was, just so, I don't know, everything is as it seemed before. We kind of want to remove our traces and steps of ever being there, but we realise that it's not really possible. But we still do it anyway. We didn't really say many words and just gave our goodbyes, and I started the long walk home then. I actually lived on the other side of town where we are, and it took quite a while to walk back. Now I can tell you that that walk back was one of the most scary of my life. I was constantly looking around, half expecting them to find me again, and I was actually planning escape routes in case that happened. There was 2 ways that I could go back. One was through a main road and the other was near a big hill, and I decided to go through the big hill. It's just a bit more of a stealthy option and it just made me feel safer, and safety is really important at this time. I eventually made my way back home and I get berated off my parents for coming home so late. I say I'm really sorry and that I was going to sleep over at Jack's house, but I forgot our number to inform my mum and dad, and I got banned from going out to sleepovers or going to see Jack for a number of months, and that was quite frustrating. But I guess it was kind of the best situation out of what had happened, because I don't know who those guys were out there, or what they were doing with the computer, or who they were looking for. But the whole situation just seems messed up. I'm just glad, like really glad that I didn't fall. And another side note thinking of it is if I had fell not expecting to fall, I probably would have especially got hurt because I wouldn't have been able to brace myself whatsoever. You know, if something falls on you and you don't see it, it hurts so much more. Yeah, just like that. Now those are probably the most creepy experiences that I had during my childhood. Now I have to bring you to one much closer. Now this happened around 2 years ago, and it's something that I still think about to this day. Now there's a few different cave systems near where this house is, and they're ones that I often didn't explore. Now there's obviously good reasons for this because it can be incredibly dangerous, but I don't know, it can kind of be enticing sometimes. And one time that I was staying up at the house on my own, I decided to go and investigate. Now it was my fault for not having enough of a structure and kind of losing focus on what was actually important in life, and I thought, hey, why don't I go and explore a cave that I know is kind of creepy and might be an interesting thing and give me something to talk about. And yeah, I got those things, but not how I wanted. So I set off one morning. It was pretty cold out and there was actually snow everywhere still at this point. Now that wasn't too much of an issue, and I actually had some snowshoes designed just for this. Now they were still a little wet from the previous day, but that doesn't matter. There was lots of different kinds of trees and shrubs around me, and there was kind of a few natural paths and breaks in the trees. Now there wasn't any snow falling currently when I set off, which is a good thing, and everything is silent, and that's just how I like it. Now I don't have to get too far until I'm just to where the cave should be, and what do you know, bingo, I find it. Now this cave is basically a big hole in the ground, which I guess most of them are, but there's not kind of like a doorway. There are some rocks which kind of separate it into 3 sections, and I decided to gauge how deep it is. I grab a rock and throw it in, and I don't hear it at first. I realise that it's a pretty deep one, but there's pretty good ways to get down the sides of it, which I actually follow. Now, this cave is quite a lot warmer than outside, and I kind of realise why the cavemen like caves. I had done some caving before, so I wasn't too worried about setting off now. I also had my torch attached to my head, and a few spare ones, which are really important for when you're doing anything like this. When I went in, I thought I was going to find all kinds of cool things, but there wasn't really too much to see at first. Now, I knew this cave wasn't supposed to be too deep, and I liked that. I go to one area, and I can see some really beautiful rock formations which are coming up and dripping down from the ceiling, which I found really nice. Now there were actually some spiders that I saw and I really don't like them, so I decided to continue on. I'm not going to go too far because obviously I'm on my own and I don't want to get lost in here. Now that's one of the stupid things that I'd done, was I didn't inform anybody of what I was doing. I remembered that at one point there was a very strong and sudden wind chill, which I thought was really odd. I hadn't felt anything like it, and I don't know why it just come on so suddenly. Now this was really cold, like noticeably colder than the surrounding parts, which I thought was bizarre. Now I continue on anyway, and I come up to an area where I see something odd. There's a chain swinging on its own. I don't know what this chain is or why it's there, but it's almost self-powered. I wondered whether it was actually a machine or something that somebody had left in there, because I knew nobody else was there but me. I do a quick hey, hello, and I don't hear anything. I think this is pretty bizarre, and I call out again, almost convinced that there should be somebody out there, other than me, but no, there's no one. Again, I think this is rather bizarre, and I continue on. I'm almost at my endpoint now, and I don't want to go much further, and I basically avoided the chain, thinking that it's something that could be explained. Now at the time it didn't hit me how creepy that was and how bizarre it was that that was left in there. I just thought some other hiker had been in there, or explorer like me, and just left some of their equipment there swinging, and I thought maybe it was somehow motorized. I guess I just wasn't thinking. Now eventually I hear a whipping sound, and I hear that it's coming from behind me. I turn around again and realise it's from that chain that I heard before. I'm now convinced someone's in here with me, and I realise that they may need help. I then turn around and go to where the chain is, and it's still swinging like before. I then go up to it, and weirdly, I can see that there's nothing to make it swing. I hold it for a second and let go, and it suddenly stops. Now at this point it wasn't swinging so fast, but I was almost certain that it shouldn't be moving like this, and I'm looking for someone who might be in danger or need help. I call out hey, and again I'm just met with echoes. I use my other torch now so I can see a bit better, but there's still no one. Annoyingly too, I actually cut past my head on one of the things hanging down from the rock formation above me. It's not a big cut, but it's annoying because I'm worried it's going to turn septic. I then decide that now is probably a good time to get out of here and start heading back, when I hear something. It almost sounds like a low growl, but it's only for a second and I can't be too certain at what I'm hearing. I think this is pretty weird, and I think maybe there's an animal that's got lost in here. Ah yes, that would make perfect sense. An animal's probably come and brushed it and I've just been in here creeping myself out. And I decide to continue. I think that I'm getting out here and I don't have any time for it. But then I hear the sound again, though this time it sounds more like a moaning. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that what I'm actually hearing, it kind of sounds like an animal, but it kind of sounds like a person too, so it's pretty hard to figure out what this is. I'm trying to figure out where this sound is coming from, but it's really hard to approximate because of the echoes, until eventually it grows a bit louder and I know where it is. It's somewhere in the inky blackness, not much further ahead. Now I've got to figure out what this is. The curiosity was kind of killing me now, and I take my first few steps towards it. Now the first I noticed of it is when a shadow was cast from my torch. I can see the silhouette of something. Not exactly certain if I wasn't looking at another rock formation. I edge closer, and that's when I see it. Hunched over, in the shape of an elongated human body, is something almost in a praying position. I look up and lock eyes with whatever this thing is, and I see some piercing dark red glowing back at me as my flashlight illuminates whatever this thing is. Now in a split second, I turned around and was bolting out of there as quick as I possibly could. Now I didn't have much time to think. I was like a trapped person with a wild animal trying to get back desperately. What I saw I can only describe as a half-human, half-statue, half-creature which was really too long and skinny. It had some human features, but I couldn't make out much of a mouth or anything. Just these absolutely disgusting, demonic-looking eyes. Now I've done lots of research since trying to find anything similar to what I saw, but I just can't find anything. Now of course none of this is going through my head while I'm sprinting back, but I just have this terrible feeling. You know, like when you're running in a nightmare and you can't get away quick enough and your legs aren't moving? Well, imagine having that but also being trapped in a cave and trying not to get lost. Yeah, it was really frustrating. I looked over my shoulder every so often and I can't see anything. But every so often, ever so faintly, I can hear a weeping sound. I don't know whether it was getting closer and I don't know where it was coming from because of the echoes, but it was sure as heck there. Now in my desperation, I get stuck. I get my arm half wedged in one of the lodges on the way and I can't get it out. I keep pulling and let out a kind of quiet muted scream as I'm punching my arm, desperately saying, "No, no, no, come on." I keep glancing back every couple of seconds just to make sure whatever that thing is hasn't moved an inch, but I can't see it. I keep punching until eventually I free my arm and unfortunately cut it in the process. I got a nasty gash on my forearm, and again I'm worried about it getting infected. I've now made it about 3/4 of the way out of the cave, and I'm starting to see some lights. The rocks are incredibly jagged in this area, and I'm not going up the way you should. I'm going up the quickest way that I can, and I pay the consequences. As I start climbing the final ascent, some of the rocks fall off, and again I cut my hand. I'm not too worried about it right now, and I'm just desperately trying to get away from this thing. I have to stop for one moment to catch my breath and get ready for the last pull which I need to get up, and that's when I hear it again. the weeping sound. It didn't sound closer than before, but it's still there. I give myself one last pull, and eventually I'm freed from the cave. I climb out as quickly as I can, and I'm constantly looking in all directions. I don't feel like I'm out of danger whatsoever, and I don't know if I'm going to get chased again, so I decide to keep moving quickly. I look back and I notice something dripping down, and to my horror I see blood. I don't know what it is or why it's there when I suddenly realise that it's my own blood and that I need to get back to help quickly. So I continue going through the woods in the cold, feeling very scared on my own, trying to get back to civilization. I have quite a way to go and I keep telling myself, you're so stupid, you're so stupid. Why on God's earth did you do that? Why did you go in there alone? What did you benefit from this? And I don't know, I just felt kind of a deep shame and fear. I don't stop looking behind myself, trying to figure out where this person or thing was. Now, I eventually make it back to the house and I manage to patch myself up not long before I get into my truck and drive over to the hospital. They give me some shots and help patch me up even better, and that's because I wasn't sure exactly what I'd been cut on. They were worried that it was rusty metal or something like that, and all the other nasties. They asked the same question that I asked myself, which is, why did you go in there alone? I say I don't know, I just felt drawn to it, and I don't actually bother telling them about what I saw. Now, I eventually make it back to one of my friend's houses, and he asked what the cuts were about, and I just made up some excuse. I really didn't want to think about what had happened again. I really pained myself even doing it for this writing. Now, I don't know if the events that I told you about are somehow linked, or whether the creature that watched me through the window is the same one that I had seen in that cave, but whatever I saw, I know wasn't a living person like you and me. I don't know what it was, and it really haunts me. Now, I don't live in America, I live in Scandinavia, and this story happened a couple of years ago and it's something I'd like to share with everyone today. Now, I was driving to a relatively remote area where I had some family. I was quite excited to see them because I haven't seen them for a number of years. Now, this was in the winter time, so there was snow absolutely everywhere, and it made driving quite difficult, to be honest. Don't worry, from where I'm from this is normal, so I kind of got used to it, and I set off. Now, I'd only have to drive for just under a day, which isn't too bad really, but I set out very early in the morning, aiming to arrive near the night time, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea, because if anything went wrong with my car, I'd be in a big problem, but it didn't happen entirely, so luckily for me things went relatively okay. Now, the first part of the drive-in is completely normal and I feel really good and everything's how it should be. I eventually make it to roughly the midway point and I'm driving through the forest now. There's not really much of a path, so I have to be quite careful. There's still some light snowfall and it's very cold outside, but I have some music playing and I'm feeling pretty good at the time. As I'm driving, there's occasional rockfall from the side of the road that I have to be very careful with because these things are really killers if you're not careful. Now, one thing that I noticed was strange is every time I seemed to look off to the side of the road, my eyes had a really hard time adjusting to what I was seeing. It was almost like my vision would shift for a little bit then go back to normal, but I wasn't too bothered by that. I was just more worried about the big rocks and things. Now, as I'm driving, I realised that the rocks are becoming more and more frequent, almost like they're placed in the middle of the road. I remember there was one particularly bad one that I actually had to get out and find a big stick to kind of lever it out of the way. It's one I couldn't have moved without the stick, and I was really glad that it actually held up to the task. Upon getting outside, I realised there was a really strange stench that I hadn't smelt before, and it seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Even when I jumped back in my car, it was like I couldn't get the smell off of me. I would roll the windows down every so often to try and get rid of it, but to be honest, it didn't really make much of a difference. I remembered coming up to a junction and my car kind of slid for a couple of seconds. Luckily my car was a bit of a beast and handled it quite well, but it was really worrying, to be honest. I had to drive much slower this time. Now staring down the road, I couldn't really see too far ahead of me because of the bends in the woods, but I knew I was going the right way. A quick glance on my phone would confirm that. Now while my tyres were struggling in the snow, I heard a strange low rumble sound outside. Thinking something was wrong with my car, I quickly pull over to the side of the road to have a listen. I lean over the hood of my car when something large falls near me. I look, and another rock has slid off the side again, somewhat obstructing me. I think this is really weird. I go to move it and I hear the same sound again. It's quite a powerful sound, and it's like nothing I've ever really heard before. Thinking maybe it's a large rock about to fall, I quickly get back in my car and make my way on once again. Now I kind of got used to the smell now because I didn't really notice it, or maybe there wasn't much of it around, so I'm pretty content as I continue driving. Now the trees around me are quite tall and almost needle-like. If you look in any particular direction, you can only see far enough before one of the trees blocks your vision. So you kind of feel like you're in an infinity pool of trees. It can be good or bad, but for me it was kind of neither. Now while driving, I seem to get a strange feeling that something's off. Now I end up coming to a particular area where something just feels like I'm not alone and I can't describe it. I decide once again to get out of my car. I can just about make out a jogger off to the side of the road wearing some white snowsuit. And I think this is bizarre because how on earth they could have got here I don't know. But thinking maybe they're in trouble, I quickly hop in the car again and slowly make my way up around a hill to where they should be parked. But strangely, I can't see any tracks at all. I decide the best thing to do is just keep going and try and find somebody. At this slow pace, 5 minutes later I still don't encounter anyone, so I just presume that probably it was in my head and nobody's actually there. I don't know whether you can imagine things from seeing so much white from the snow, or the trees becoming so similar to each other, but maybe that's what I was experiencing. Maybe I was dehydrated. I went to swig some more of my water, but I realised that I drank a lot, and it was unlikely that either of those things were causing it. I come up to another corner, and again there's another rock in the road, and I realise something's off. I come up to a point where I can either go to the left path or right path. Now the left will lead me the right way, but I'm just so curious as to what's made me stop this time, so I get out. Now when I get out, curiosity gets the better of me, and I want to see how this rock got here because there's no way it slid down. I decide to move off to the side of the road, and that's when I'm hit with the smell once again. Now, I don't exactly know what it was, but I had a feeling it wasn't a jogger with me. And yeah, where is he? I decide to look around again when the smell becomes absolutely overpowering. And I can just about make something out, moving across the tree line. Now, this thing or person was moving impossibly quick. It looked like the jogger again, but this time much taller. And the ground was moving a little bit as they did. And the stench was disgusting. I've realised something's gravely wrong now, and I start sprinting. I ended up stumbling initially, but quickly steadying myself again on a tree. I actually pierce a hole in my coat and I'm bleeding a little bit. I quickly make my way back into my car and slam the door. I press the ignition and it doesn't work. I swear and punch the wheel. And as I do that, the horn goes off, and it's extremely loud. Then I can just about make out whatever this figure is sprinting off now in the other direction. I roll down the window just to hear if there's anything, and the silence. There's just snow falling onto my arm as it's out the window, and I can see that thing fade off. I then go to start the engine again, and as it roars into life, there's a horrifying sound which sounds like a very deep guttural growl. Again, like nothing I've ever heard before. That was my cue to get out of there. I rolled up the window and quickly set off on the left path. I'm driving very quickly, to be honest, considering the conditions, but I just about make it. I end up coming onto a main road again, and I basically sped the rest of the way to the family's house. Now, nothing else unusual happened on that trip, but I don't really want to say I believe in some of the Nordic urban legends or any of those other things, but I don't know what it could have possibly been. It could have easily been somebody out there, but I don't know. Something about what I'd experienced that day was really off. I'll leave it for you guys to decide what you think it is, but I haven't really made up my mind as to what happened to me that day.